Our scripture reading today is from Matthew chapter 25. We're reading a passage from the parable of the talents. So we're going to read from verses 22 to 27. So Matthew chapter 25, verses 22 to 27. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So my day job is a structural engineer, and one thing that we're taught, and one thing that's in our governing body's code of ethics that we're obligated to follow, is the obligation to public safety. That's kind of the thing that they say must be held paramount. And it makes sense. We're in my field of engineering, I'm designing structures, so of course you don't want those collapsing in a pile of rubble, killing everybody inside. You have this obligation to design safe things. One thing that I've heard, I'm not sure if this is an urban legend or not, but one thing I've heard is how the Romans would make the engineer who designed a bridge stand under the bridge and have a legion march across it. So just to show that this is important and you have to make sure that these things are safe. So this concept, I'm sure everybody would understand that it makes sense for the things that you are designing. So if somebody comes to me and says, can you design this for me? And I do that and I do the work. I have this obligation to make sure that it's safe. But one thing that we're also taught is that our responsibility goes beyond the scope of what you are particularly designing, but also the things that you just happen to see. They say that if you see a structure that's unsafe, just in your daily life, so if I'm just driving around and I see something that's obviously unsafe, I have an obligation to do something about that. I have an obligation to contact somebody and say, why is this thing, in this way? And it gets back to that idea of the obligation to public safety. Since we have, the skills, the knowledge, the training, the schooling, and all that to recognize these things, that maybe somebody who doesn't have those, those abilities to recognize, we have that obligation because we have those skills to to report these things, even though we may not be involved with the project. This is something that I actually run into in my day job on a fairly regular basis. In a construction project, there's lots of different engineers and people working on this project. So I see a lot of stuff that is not within my scope of engineering. And usually it kind of comes down to kind of a professional courtesy in a sense, that if I see something that's pretty much obviously a mistake, and usually it's just an honest mistake, I just contact that other engineer and say, hey, did you notice this? And they go, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't see that, and then they fix whatever it happens to be. So you have that obligation because you have the knowledge to recognize these things, to point them out, because of that obligation to public safety. And a similar thing is presented to us as Christians. We all have talents, we all have abilities, and we have the obligation to take advantage of those abilities to our ability. That's one thing that I thought about, as I was brushing the snow off our SUV this morning. This much snow off the SUV. Is we have to take advantage of the skills to our ability. We're trying to brush the top, and I'm, not the tallest guy in the world, so trying to brush the snow off the top of the SUV. We did the best we could, but there's this little strip right in the middle that we can't reach with the brushes that we have. We did the best that we could with the height that we have and the brushes that we have, but it is to the best of our ability. And that's one thing that's talked about in this parable of the talents, is that we have an obligation to do the best we can with what God has blessed us with. And that's what's being talked about in this parable of the talents. It stresses the need to be productive and that requirement of working for the Lord to the best of our ability, the things that he's blessed us with. So we're going to go through this. Again, if you have your Bibles with you, I encourage you to follow along. Put your bookmarks in Matthew 25. We're going to go through that passage. We're not going to read every single verse of the parable, but we are going to look at certain passages out of there and see what God is teaching us through this passage. He's teaching us these things that we have to have, these skills and these the things that we must do according to his will. So let's go to Matthew 25, and we'll look at verses 14 to 15 to introduce the parable, to kind of see what Jesus is teaching us in this parable, to kind of set the setting of it. So Matthew 25, starting in verse 14. It says, "Again, it will be like a man going on a journey." So when he says it will be like a man, it's the kingdom of God is what he's referring to. So the kingdom of God will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. So if you read this passage, when we read the word talent, we often think of natural abilities. But in the context of this passage, the talent here is actually a monetary measure. It's a measure of money, a measure of gold. It amounts to about 6,000 denarii, and it would take an ordinary laborer at that time about 20 years to earn that amount. So take 20 years earnings is 1 talent. So he's giving 5 talents, to one person, and 2 to another, and 1 to another. So it's a pretty substantial amount of cash that he's handing out to these guys. And one interesting thing that we can recognize or see here is that each talent, or the number of talents, was given to each of the men, or the servants, according to his own ability. So again, he recognized their ability and gave them what he thought they could handle. He's giving them this amount of money based on what he sees as their abilities. We keep reading, and we'll look at verses 16 to 18. So we'll keep on reading at verse 16. It says, "The man who had received 5 talents went out at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money." So here we have the passage as to how the servants, or what they did with the talents that they were entrusted to. The person the 2 that had 5 and 2 talents, they doubled their money. They used that, and they used it according to the best of their ability, and they doubled the money. Where the 1 servant simply just hid the money, dug a hole and hid it in the ground. So we look to verse 20. The Lord returns, or the master returns after a long time, and he checks in to see how everybody did. He's saying, "How'd you guys do with this talent, or this amount of money that I gave you?" Verse 20 of Matthew 25. "The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. 'Master,' he said, 'you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more.'" So again, this is one example where the person with 5 talents, the servant with 5, doubled his money. The 2-talent servant had a similar result. He doubled his money as well. And so they both stood before the master with excitement. You'd be excited. If you did a good job and you knew you did a good job, you'd be like, "See what I did?" And you're proud of the work that you've done. And the master was pleased. He praises them for their work. He says, "Well done, good and faithful servants." And he rewards them by promoting them. He says, "You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." So they get their reward based on the work that they've done. They took advantage of their abilities. They took advantage of the things that were entrusted to them. They doubled them. They did a good job. So now he gives them more responsibility and more, a promotion because of this. And then he invites them, "Come and share in your master's happiness." Then we come to the person, or the servant, with 1 talent. If you go to Matthew 25, we'll start reading partway through verse 24. So Matthew 25:24. It says, "Master," he said, "I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." So if you notice, the difference between the 5 and 2 talent servants and the 1 talent servant is the 2 and 5 are like, proud, like, "See what we've done." They start out with their results. This servant starts out with excuses. He starts kind of hedging his results, in a sense. He's kind of hiding what he said. And things didn't go well. So usually if that happens, if somebody's in that position, they start their story with excuses. Things are really tough. Things didn't go very well. And then they kind of give the bad news. He's trying to soften up the master in a sense. That's the way it worked. and he's seeking to appease the Lord by returning what he had given. He says, see, here is what belongs to you. I didn't lose any of it. I just didn't do very much with it. So he's saying, trying to soften him up and then just giving him back what he gave him originally. So here's what we see as the master's response. Go to verse 26. So again, he didn't lose any money. So you would think that maybe that's not so bad. But we can see what the master's response is. So verse 26. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So things didn't go well for the servant with 1 talent. He didn't lose any money. That's the one thing that I find kind of interesting here is that he hid the money. He didn't lose any of it. He still was a pretty good steward in that respect. But he didn't take advantage of the abilities that he had to try to do something with that money. And so there was terrible consequences for the lazy servant. That's the way he was described. The first words out of the master's mouth is, you wicked, lazy servant. So it's kind of an interesting situation because he didn't use what the master gave him to the potential that he had, and he was punished as a result. He had a certain ability, and the master expected him to use it. That was the expectation here. It wasn't just hold on to it. He expected him to use that money and do something with it. So how do we apply this parable to ourselves? We know that parables that are taught in the New Testament represent a learning opportunity for us. He's trying to tell us a theme of what we should recognize here. So how do we apply this? What is a talent in the story? We already said that it's a sum of money in respect to the context of the story said here. But what is a talent to us? What is a talent with respect to us in our lives as Christians? It could actually be money. It could be something that we're blessed with as far as monetary wealth, something that does have value. But a talent can really be any opportunity or ability that we have that we can use to serve the Lord. So any sort of opportunity or ability that we're blessed with. It's something where we are blessed with things. God has given us certain things. And again, we can use the word talent as we use it, and it can be a talent that we have. If you have a certain talent for a certain thing or skill, that is something that it could be. And it could also be any sort of opportunity that that is presented to us. So again, life is full of opportunities. They're all around us. And they're ready to be taken advantage of. And we have the ability, and we're blessed with an ability to take advantage of those opportunities. And that is a talent to us. When we apply this parable to us, it can be a wealth, it can be money, it can be physical things, but also included in that is our abilities that we are blessed with. Anything that God has given to us as a steward, we are to use that to the best of our ability. One thing to note, if you go back to Matthew 25, verse 14, sometimes we think these things are ours. This is my talent or my opportunity or my wealth. If you look at Matthew 25, verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. Whatever we have, whether opportunities, abilities, physical possessions, all of these things actually belong to God. We are simply stewards of those things. He's given us our talents in that sense. He's provided us with our natural abilities, the opportunities, and we are to use them however we can. He's entrusting these things to us, and we have to use those abilities to the best of our ability, or use these talents to the best of our ability. So the main point of this parable that we can apply in our lives is that we need to use these abilities and opportunities that the Lord has given to us. We have to take advantage of these things. And a missed opportunity can be a situation or the use of your abilities. If a situation passes by you in your life and you recognize that there's something that you can do about that and you don't do anything about it, that's a missed opportunity. And that's something that we are to take advantage of. A quote from Mark Twain that I liked was, "I was seldom able to see an opportunity until it had ceased to be one." We have to be aware of what's going on around us and try to recognize these opportunities. And again, that is an ability that we would have, or that we have, that is a blessing from God. It's been entrusted to us. He's entrusted us these abilities and these talents and these opportunities. And we have to do a little bit of work to recognize these things and take advantage of them. Another quote from Thomas Edison is, "Opportunity is missed by most people because it is dressed in overalls and looks like work." That goes back to the wicked and lazy servant quote, or the thing that the master said to the servant with one talent. You wicked, lazy servant. Sometimes we're just lazy. We don't want to take advantage of the opportunities because we're doing something else. We just don't want to. Again, that's the thing that we have to do as Christians, is take advantage of every opportunity. Keep your bookmarks in Matthew, but go to Ephesians 5. Ephesians chapter 5, we'll look at verses 15 and 16. In the parable of the talents, he is telling us that we have to use our abilities and opportunities. Those things are to us our talents. These things that he's provided to us are entrusted to us. And in Ephesians 5, verses 15 and 16, it relates to this same concept that's being taught in this parable. Ephesians 5, starting in verse 15. It says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil." Diligence in using our abilities is rewarded. That's what we learn in the parable of the talents. The ones with 5 and 2 doubled their money, and they were rewarded. They come and share in his master's happiness. Negligence in using our abilities is punished. Again, that's where it's a very important lesson to learn, is because sometimes we think if we sit back and we just kind of do the minimum, that's okay. But the parable of talents is teaching us that that's not okay. We do have to take advantage of these things that we're blessed with. Those who make excuses for not using their abilities are considered wicked and lazy servants. So it's a pretty high bar to meet. It's something that God is giving us a high bar to follow, something that we have to meet in this way. A place of punishment is reserved for these unprofitable servants. That's one thing that, again, we have to understand, is that a sin of omission, of not acting, is just as bad as the sin of commission, the ones that we are actually acting out. If you go to Matthew 13, we'll look at verse 41. This is a passage from the parable of the weeds. This is one that we would probably understand very clearly, in the sense that people who actually do evil, those people who sin by commission, are going to be punished. So Matthew 13 and verse 41 says, "The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil." So the Son of Man is going to weed out of his kingdom those people who cause sin and do evil. Again, this makes sense. If somebody is actively sinning and actively going against what God says, we understand that that person is sinning and they're going to be weeded out. They're going to be punished. If you go to James chapter 4 and verse 17. So James chapter 4 and verse 17. This is where it's a very important concept to understand, is that those people who do nothing will also be punished. It's not enough just to bury your talent in the ground and kind of hold off. James chapter 4 and verse 17. "Anyone then who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it sins." So that kind of relates back to that mandate that us as engineers, we have to follow in that sense, in my field of work. Is that if you have the abilities and the skills to recognize something, but then you hold back and you do nothing about it, that's a violation. That's something that I can get in trouble for if I hold back on that. And God is teaching us this same concept. If we know the good that we ought to do, if we have an ability and we see an opportunity and we don't do anything about it, we are sinning. It's something that we're sinning by omission. We're sinning by not acting. God does not accept complacency and holding back when you see these opportunities. If you're just not doing what needs to be done, it is a sinful thing. And that's just like the servant who didn't use his talent wisely. If you go to Romans 12, the main lesson really in this parable of the talents is a simple one to understand, is we have to be productive where the Lord has given us ability or opportunity. If we have our talents, and again, if you recognize talents as a skill or a special skill that you have, wealth, money, possessions, anything like that, ability or opportunity, we have to be productive when God has given us those things, when he's entrusted those things to us. We are stewards of these things that he owns. So one question that you might ask yourself are, what are my talents? What are my talents that I have to take advantage of? We see that it's a very important thing to take advantage of our talents, but what are they? How do you recognize them within yourself? We don't all have the same talents. The number of talents may be different, just like in the parable where one servant was given 5 talents, another one 2, another one 1, based on their ability. We are in the same boat sometimes. Some people have more ability, some people have less. That's just a fact of how things are. If you go to Romans 12, we can also see how the nature of the talents are also going to be different. We look at verses 4 and 5 of Romans 12. This is a teaching from Paul. He says, just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. So he goes on in this passage to talk about the different skills and abilities that we all may or may not have. And he's showing us how the nature of our skills and our abilities are going to be different. And that's really a blessing. That's something that is a good thing. If somebody's good at one thing and another person is good at another thing, that's a good thing. Because just as he compares it to a human body, if we're all hands, it's not going to do any good. You have to have hands, feet, nose, head, all of those different things. With all of those different things working together, it forms one body. And then that can be the best way and use of the abilities that we are to have, or that we do have. So God has given us our different and varied talents. And we are to use those talents to serve him. And he's expecting us to do that, not just to sit back and be complacent with the talents that we have. So how do you determine what your talents are? You may not know. That's where sometimes it's kind of, you can be asking yourself, like, I know that we all have different ones, but what is mine? What is the thing that I may or may not be good at? A lot of it can be trial and error. Just trying things. Again, in Romans 12, he's talking about these different things: teaching, serving, preaching, encouraging other people. All of these different things are talents that we may or may not have. And we can check what we might be good at just through trial and error. Try something out. If you're not sure if you're going to be good at teaching, try teaching somebody something and see how it goes. And sometimes it may not come naturally the first time, but you got to try it a few times. Try it over and over again. See if you can improve. And you might find that maybe, no, this isn't my thing. Maybe it's not my thing to be a good encourager or a good teacher. We still have the ability to teach people in general and encourage people in general. But try and see if you can develop your talent, the thing that you might be good at, but you'll probably find that there's some things that you're just naturally good at, some things that you're naturally prone to do, and adapt to well. You could also seek the counsel of other people. We're blessed with a church family that is going to tell us the truth, hopefully. That's what we should be doing. You go to Proverbs 19. Solomon in this passage praised the value of receiving counsel. And other people sometimes can recognize our strengths and the things that we're good at better than us ourselves. That's what happens sometimes, in my role, if I'm up here talking, I sometimes get down and I'm finished, and then Kristen and I are driving home, and I say, I'm thinking to myself, that one didn't go well at all. And she goes, oh, no, that one really, really, really well. So you have kind of sometimes a skewed view of how you are doing in certain things, and other people think it's different, and you have to trust those other people. Proverbs 19 and verse 20. It says, listen to advice and accept instruction, and in the end, you will be wise. So again, I think it's assumed here that the advice being given is good advice, because you can have bad advice too. But the idea here is that if you have somebody that is in your church family, somebody that you love, somebody that you trust, a really good friend, and they're telling you something, it's wise to listen to that. It's wise to kind of take that in. And they might recognize your strengths and weaknesses. Maybe you're in a role that you're not suited for, and you think you're doing awesome, but other people are saying, nah, you're not doing so good at that. Maybe you have to either work harder at it and try to improve, or maybe try something else. This is all part of that trial and error process where we determine our abilities and our opportunities. We can figure out what we are really good at, and then we can use that to serve God. Again, he doesn't accept that complacency. We have to keep trying and keep trying to work to him because he expects it. If we don't do that, we're considered wicked and lazy. Again, very high bar to be set to understand this. So if we are in the kingdom, the Lord has all given us an ability to serve him. One day he is coming again, and he's going to expect an account of how we did, just the same way the master came back from his long journey. And he's going to ask every single one of us, he's going to say, how'd you guys do? And we're going to have to give an account. So are you productive? Are you doing all you can to take advantage of the abilities and the talents and the opportunities that God has endowed upon you or entrusted to you? Are you making the most of every opportunity that you can see? Or are you like a wicked and lazy servant who's just kind of hanging back and just sitting on whatever God has given you? I'd encourage everyone to do all they can to make sure the Lord says to you on that day, well done, good and faithful servant. Come and share in your master's happiness. Again, it's a very high bar. You can fool a lot of people, including yourselves, with respect to these kind of things. You can kind of justify your actions and justify what you're doing, saying, I'm doing a pretty good job. And you might be fooling others, you might be fooling yourselves, but you're not going to fool God. And that's one thing you have to really be honest with yourself is, am I really doing all I can to take advantage of the things that God has endowed or blessed to you and entrusted to you? So take advantage of your abilities and opportunities and all you can to serve the Lord. I'd like to offer an invitation. If you've not yet accepted Jesus on as your Lord, we can show you in the scriptures how to do that. And if you're a Christian who's struggling in any way, again, the church family is here to help. If you make your needs known, we'd love to help you in any way that we can.